Hello, oh, hello everyone out there in Cyberland. This is Carla from Rehan Awawa's World of Connections. And I am here today to speak with Pauline, Pauline Crawford-Omps.
That's it.
That's her new branded name, and I think she also has doctor in front of it.
I do.
We are here to speak about her life, her work, and her passions. And she's very passionate about magical conversations. She will explain that to us in a few moments. Meanwhile, I want to remind you that this show is sponsored by the Institute of Peace, which is an online organization promoting peace one conversation at a time. Pauline, will you please introduce yourself?
I will be delighted to, and it's fabulous to be here with you, Carla. As everybody might guess, I'm British, so you can hear a British voice here, but I am living in the US, in Las Vegas. And as you said, my name is Dr. Pauline Crawford-Omps. I'll explain the doctor in a little while, but I am the ambassador of Magical Conversations, and that title has come to me over 30 years of working with men and women and helping men and women to have conversations with each other about lots of topics, but often the ones that are kind of hard to manage. And that's what I mean when I say magical conversations, because it's a way of having a conversation which you come together with no judgment and no anger and no arguments and no coercion. And it's been my kind of life work. But in precise terms, I'm a behavioralist. So I study behavior in singular individuals and also in groups. And my organization is Corporate Heart International. So putting the heart back into business is absolutely my passion through magical conversations and really engaging, as I say, men and women of all generations, all cultures, everywhere across the world, in understanding that if we value our differences, that's where the magic comes from. So instead of saying, oh, well, you're different, so I don't want to talk to you, actually saying, wow, you're different, so let's have a conversation and understand different perspectives. And it's been all my life, to be honest, Carla. You know, as a kid, I would have dreamed of having a job like this, and here I am actually doing it across the world. So I help people to understand themselves and understand the conversations that can make their life fantastic and make all of us a lot happier in the way we create our future now that we're in this crazy pandemic and we have all sorts of opportunities to do so. As I say, just a little background, I'm British, I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, but I'm also an entrepreneur and an entrepreneurologist, which is part of my doctorate. And I am married to an American, and that's a story in itself, which was only 9 years ago. So I can share a little bit more about that and the magic behind that.
Can you please? You were beginning to tell me that before we went live, and it sounds like quite a conversation.
Well, it is. And I want to put it in the context of how we set intentions for our life. You know, if I went back to when I was a teenager, I would never have imagined that my life would be where it is now. But every decade and every month, every day, I become able to see opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities cause a degree of sadness, as I was with my first husband for 30 years, and my children, my grandchildren, but we got to that impasse in life where it wasn't working anymore. And I decided that I really wanted to stretch my wings and become more of a businesswoman and more of a world traveler. And so we parted with some degree of friendship still retained. But then I set off in the second half of my life, and I was very busy creating Corporate Heart and working with clients in the UK. But I always dreamed that I would meet my soulmate. And it was quite a long time, a good I think, 16 years before I met Jim. And I met him in a very extraordinary place, which was Budapest. Now, Budapest isn't extraordinary itself, but it is when you think about he was coming from Las Vegas and I was coming from London. And the thing was that it was actually a business conference that neither of us wanted to go to. And we had both been trying to persuade our colleagues separately that we didn't want to go because it didn't fit in with our schedule. But somebody, universal, angelic, whatever forces you think and believe that come together, something enabled us to be there. And it was actually Thanksgiving Day, 2011. Now, Thanksgiving Day in those days didn't mean anything to me because I'm not American. But of course, it was important to Jim because he's American. And we met at this conference and we were only there for a day and a half, but we had an amazing, magical conversation over breakfast, which really sealed our friendship. And we started writing to each other. So he went back to America, I went back to London, I was moving house, I was doing all sorts of really stressful things. But we started writing, and 6 months later, and 45,000 words later, we had fallen in love. Without a kiss and without a cuddle, we had fallen in love. And I thought, right, I was 62 at the time. I thought, I'm going to get on an aeroplane and I'm going to go and stay with this man and see what happens. And so I did. I came to Las Vegas and we fell more in love. And he invited me to marry him. And I said yes. And so we got married in a little Whitechapel later on that year. And wow. I had never imagined that I would do something as crazy as that. But I think it shows you that if you set your intention, I had set my intention to find my soulmate. I hadn't put a condition on it, like it was going to be a British person and I wasn't going to move. It was an American, and I ended up living not only here in America, but for 4 years, we lived in Malaysia. So all sorts of magic has come out of that one meeting. And I believe it's about being ready, knowing yourself and being ready for whatever comes into your life. And if it touches your heart and you go with the flow, you don't think about all the consequences of, should I do this, should I do that? Just go with your instincts, with your intuition and your heart.
I am overwhelmed by that story. How long was this conference?
Oh, the conference was only a few days. And in fact, I could only go for a day and a half. I think I flew out on the Wednesday night. The conference was the Thursday. That's when we met. And then I had to fly back to England on the Friday. And the actual conference day was taken up with speakers. In fact, Jim was one of the speakers, and getting to know each other. And I think this is where the natural opening of conversation, which was my forte, I said, hi, there was an attraction, definitely. But we were talking about, he said, well, I'm a professor of entrepreneurology. And I said, oh, that sounds really interesting because I'm an entrepreneur and that sounds like something I might be interested in. And I said to him, well, I study gender dynamics and the energy between men and women. And he said, oh, wow, that's exactly the fit that we need for the university. So, I mean, we started off with that synergy, but I have to say, we were a bit like naughty school kids in the conference because we were much more interested in chatting in the third row than we were listening to the speakers. And there was just a natural energy. And I remember when in the morning, I came down to breakfast and I thought, oh, I'm just going to have breakfast. I went to the breakfast room and Jim was sitting in the corner and I thought, oh, that's good. And I went over and I said, can I sit and have breakfast with you? And of course, he was delighted. And then, as I said, we had this magical 35-minute conversation in which we shared everything. I mean, like we were divorced, what we'd done in our life, our kids, whether we believed in aliens or not. And one of the things that surprised Jim was that he's quite an introvert character. And he said, I can't believe I told you all these things. And I said, well, it's just the nature of being interested, because my passion is to be transparent, to be open, to be interested. So we weren't talking about ourselves from an ego point of view, but there was this synergy. And that's a word that I use a lot in my work, real synergy. And we didn't think, oh, where's this going to go? It was just, oh, this is great. And in fact, when I left that later that day, I thought, Las Vegas, London, it's a long way apart, but who knows? So I let it unfold. And I think that's the thing, even now, we need to let things unfold and not try and pin everything down straight away. That's the art of magical conversation. So it was very exciting, and it hasn't been straightforward. Part of our challenge is that Jim had had cancer and he had to have an operation. In fact, he had an operation literally 12 days before we got married in Las Vegas. And we flew back to England and we were going to live in England and we'd had everything planned there. But sadly, the operation hadn't worked and we had to come back to America and he had to have another operation. And it caused us to get into a tangle with immigration because we foolishly hadn't thought about how do you live in another country when you're not a resident. And that's why we ended up going to Malaysia, because it was easier to go there and be a visitor for a few months in order to be somewhere together. And then we decided we liked it and we became taxpayers there and stayed there for 4 years, which was totally an experience I would never have been able to plan. You know, it wasn't on my horizon at all, but I ended up nursing him to wellness, and he and I working with teams of Malaysian individuals, entrepreneurs, and official government people. And it was fabulous. And I would never had that experience if I hadn't dropped into Budapest and met him there.
That is amazing. Do you remember any of that conversation after you said hi to him for breakfast?
Well, I do. And it was interesting because he said to me, we were in the lobby of a hotel and I had come down. I was looking very smart. I had dark hair at the time because I was dyeing my hair. So I had this red jacket on, similar hairstyle, but dark. And I was sitting there and I was sitting with a colleague of mine, an Indian gentleman called Hamad, who had been the orchestrator of the invitation. And we didn't know where the conference was. And Jim was sitting on the other side of the lobby. And I thought, he looks rather interesting. And he said that he spotted me because of my smile. And he was wondering why I was married to the Indian gentleman. So I laughed about that later on because that was such an assumption. I said, no, he's just a colleague. But we actually just gelled. And I think it was something also about his American accent. I was intrigued. He had a very professorial presence. And I think it's about, there was not chatting up. We weren't chatting each other up, but there was a natural curiosity. And that's what I feel with people. We sometimes resist getting involved with somebody because we think, oh, we're invading their privacy. But actually, if we're curious in a healthy way, and that interest sparks, then we start a flow of conversation. And that's really what happened. As I say, there was nothing amorous about the meeting in Budapest. We just got on really well. There was an exchange of business cards and a sort of peck on the cheek and, well, hopefully we'll see you again. We didn't even know then. We didn't make a commitment to writing. It just evolved because we were interested in each other.
How cool. I have seen that happen with emails and,
Well, and again, the interesting thing with the emails, and this is partly about what I've studied about different types of women, when in the emails, we were very much exploring the friendship. They weren't chat up emails. And I always said to Jim, he was very wise to say that he found me attractive, but also very intelligent. And I needed that. It's like if it had just been what I would say a sort of chat up line, I probably wouldn't have been interested, but it was actually exploring the ideas we had together, and so we would talk about life and business and relationships. And in 6 months, we never actually spoke on the phone. This was the curious thing. It was all in the emails. And Jim is a phenomenal writer. And I love writing. And I write as I think. So the emails are there. In fact, we've often thought we will publish them because they're not, as I say, they're just really two mature people exploring differences. And it's very much what I'm passionate about is in a magical conversation. It's about finding out what makes people tick and how do you tune in together. And then it turned, it was about 5 months before it became romantic.
That is such a cool story.
And I think sometimes people rush into maybe intense, intimate relationships too quickly before they understand what 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 is the persona, what is the personality, what are the common interests. Um, that's really the secret to this real, true connectivity. So that, American culture and British culture is very different. What we had in common was we were the same decade. So he's only 5 years older than me. So we can remember decades of music and world affairs, even though he was on one side of the planet and I was on the other. But I think those are the things that also help when there are differences as well. Because sometimes differences do bring up negative stuff because you go, as you know, and I didn't realize till I lived here that the English language is different to the American language. We have lots of things we say differently.
Oh, yeah.
And, I've made some real boo-boos when I've been presenting here because I've said something and I think, I don't think the audience got what I was saying.
And that does happen.
Yeah.
More often than you realize.
Absolutely. And it's not just the sound of the word, the tomato, etc., but the actual concept you might be saying is different. I mean, the funniest one is that because my work is about communication, connection, I was saying on an interview, well, of course, my work is about helping people get on with each other. And Jim's in the corner of the room going, and I'm going, what do you mean? He said, well, in America, that means chatting up each other, I believe that's right.
Yeah.
Well, in England, it doesn't. It just means saying hello, literally starting a communication, a relationship. It doesn't have any undertone or overtone. So
that's interesting. I was talking to a friend and I was anxious because I'd be going to that country and talking to many people. And I said, oh, can I play with you and your family when I'm there? And he went, play? That isn't, and he knew right away that wasn't how I meant it. He said,
yes.
You're talking sexually. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm saying going out and having fun. I mean, I'm talking your family. Where did that come from?
Well, that's right. And this is where I do believe the situation we're in at the moment in the world, where there's lots of polarizations and lots of arguments, a lot of it is differences misunderstood. And unless we explore those and say, no, actually, in my language, it means this and yours is that. And English has, there's international English, there's American English, there's different types of English. And if we were talking to somebody in a totally different language, so French or Italian, we would still have some interpretation issues, but we would be more ready to believe that we were different.
That's interesting.
Yes.
It's interesting how words and the play on the words can change exactly what you're saying.
Yes, and of course there's the tonality and the body language. But I think all of it, and that comes back to my story with meeting Jim, was there was an intention. And interesting enough, I'd written in my book many, many times, I hope I meet my soulmate this week, this day, whatever. And I had written the night before I flew to Budapest, I hope I meet lots of good people and maybe I'll meet my soulmate. And there he was. But we were talking recently about setting intentions, setting them verbally, writing them down. They will come to be. So you've got to be ready for the intentions that you've set, and then they will come to you. So if my intention and everybody's intention is to create a world that's better than the one we have had before COVID, then that intention will start collecting energy. But we have to know ourselves to know what it is we really want. So I knew that I could be okay without my soulmate, but I thought it would be really nice to have my soulmate. And I never realized it would take me around the world. And that's, I believe, the intention I kind of had secretly was to be with somebody and travel. But what I got was actually living in another country, which is different to traveling.
Right, because you become a part of that country.
Yes. And I had never imagined that in, 62 years in England. And I visited many countries. I've been to America a couple of times. I've been to New Zealand. I've been lots of Africa across. I never imagined I would actually go and live in another country. It hadn't dawned on me, but it became natural when I met somebody who made me feel excited about being with them. And even with that, we hadn't planned Malaysia. That was, that came up because we needed to be somewhere. And we came back to America in 2018 because Jim wanted to be back here in the medical system here. And I said, yeah, let's do that. So I'm getting to know America now. And of course, now I'm getting to know a COVID world, given all these wonderful connections. So I think for me, the magic and magical conversations of my life is all about flow. And I love to dance. So I love the idea of dance and flow. And if you're dancing and flowing, you have to listen to the music. And the music is the conversation that you're having with different people in different countries. And also letting go of not knowing what the answers are, because that's the excitement of the unknown that we're now entering into.
Talking about COVID, I don't want to get strongly in COVID, but magical conversations. Did they become more magical since this COVID thing, or?
Actually, yes. I think for me, the transition to having conversations across the world more easily has come because COVID has given us this new Zoom space, this new online space. In all honesty, a magical conversation is much better if you are in a live circle in a room. But because we can't do that, then having your space online and really learning how to listen and observe when people are on screen. As you know, it's like some people don't know how to use the screen. They don't look, or they don't get right in the center of the screen. So that's the additional, it's almost like the body language of the Zoom. But I think because we've gone so polarized about everything in this world, there's so many arguments and dysfunctional that we need magical conversations more. And I'm really glad I've held on to the idea of magical conversations. And let me just give you a story as well about my daughter, who is a beautiful, beautiful woman. And in 2008, she had said to me, "Oh, Mum, you should be president of Magical Conversations." I must have sold something for her, I don't know. And I thought, oh, I like that, but I think president's a bit grand. So I decided to use a title, the Ambassador of Magical Conversation. And I got a business card. And I just had very plain in scroll type of ambassador writing. It said the Ambassador of Magical Conversation, Pauline Crawford. And I tried it out at network parties, and it was amazingly effective because people were intrigued. So it's a bit like any branding. It's like magical conversation. Oh, I want one of those. And this is in 2008. And the first time I did it was all women. And the second time, it was a group of very influential lawyers, men and women, some kind of garden party in London. And a friend of mine who was a client, a lawyer, she came across to me and said hello. And then she turned to her husband and said, "Oh, this is the Ambassador of Magical Conversations." And I have to admit, I felt quite stunned at the time because I thought, oh, he's a male lawyer. He's not going to like this. And one of my chapters in the book is Don't Make Assumptions, because he said immediately, he said, wow, he said, definitely, we need magical conversations in the law because we're too serious. And I thought, that's so interesting that you should never make the assumption that people will make assumptions, if you like, because people want to open up their minds, and magic is something that's, it could be scary, but it could be also creating new ideas.
What made you come up with the word magical? in there?
Well, this was my daughter, you see. My daughter said to me that she saw me as the president of Magical Conversations. And I hadn't thought about that as a concept. So she was the one who gave me the idea and I ran with it. And it's been with me ever since. And that's why my first book is Magical Conversations.
How many books have you written?
This is my first one. So this is my first book, but I've actually got another book about to be published, I'm hoping in the next month, which is my in-depth book about gender dynamics intelligence. And this is about how do men and women, how do we get together? How do we create synergy? How do we understand the differences? So there are different types of men and women, as you know, and the masculine and feminine energy within us is what I study. And I created a map. So my goal is the next book I'm going to publish is The Gender Dynamics of Life. Who's in charge? And of course, you're in charge, I'm in charge. We're all in charge of our own life. But I want to help people understand the beauty that they are as individual types of men and women, so we can get past some of these difficult argumentative situations. So that's the goal. So hopefully my next book will be out in the next 2 or 3 months. That's my goal. It's all written and I'm working with a potential publisher. So
now men and women do think differently. For a long period of time, I didn't think that was true. And then it became very apparent. What causes this difference?
Well, I believe it's the misunderstandings that have occurred have made the divide greater. And then the desire for equality has kind of made us look at it in a kind of an official policy way. Actually, it's fundamental to our biological makeup that we are the natural human beings we are. So men have what I call like an operating pattern. Their biology is a certain way and females' biology is a certain way. And that's caused that divide, you know, the classic Dr. John Gray, men are for Mars, women are for Venus. There's some truth in that because men generally are much more logical, one step at a time, either or, task focused. And women generally are more circular and more hormonal and more and we think of everything at once. But of course, what's happened is that we've all grown up now into a highly digital, enlightened world. So we believe we're all the same. Now we can do all the same things, but like it's like having a PC and a Mac. There's different operating patterns. And what I believe has happened is that as women have striven to be more assertive and more in the business world over the last several decades, we've got caught in this idea that women can only be successful in business if they're more masculine. Actually, that's not true. They can just be women, but have a masculine mind, like I do. So the thing that happened for me was I was studying bodies. It might sound strange, but I was an image consultant back in 1989. I had been not working while I had my kids, and I decided I would go back to dressmaking, and I went back to college, and I decided I'd be a dressmaker, and I decided that I didn't want to do that. So I got into image world, which was very new in England at the time. It was a new industry, and I was fascinated. It was all about colors and shapes and styles. And then I suddenly found myself watching these different bodies in front of me. And the women who were my structure, who were very, maybe in their teens, had been a bit of a tomboy girl. They were very kind of straight body shape, not straight flesh, but actually they liked things straight. They often were business majors or mathematicians or construction. You know, they were in sectors which were more masculine. They had the same body shape as me. And then other women who had different body shapes were more feminine female. And I started developing this idea then back in 1990. How could I map this out so that I could understand myself and I could communicate with different types? Because the shape of your body and the way you stood seemed to relate to some basic operating patterns in your communication. So if you look at men, and I think this might give the example, men generally are more straightforward in terms of one step at a time. But if you're a very masculine male, then you are very, what I would call a bullet point man. You're the one who is always very much into action. Whereas the feminine-minded male, and this is nothing to do with sexual orientation, feminine-minded male is somebody like Nelson Mandela, who's all male, but has an intuitive, highly intuitive philosopher, I call him. And he's very different to the masculine-minded man who's more of the king, the ruler. And then we look at women, we get some women who are, as I said, more masculine-minded, but we're all female, and there's some that are more feminine-minded, but we're all different to the men. So there's different types of men, different types of women. So what I've done is I've put them into a 360-degree map to make sure that we can then have conversations about all the other diversities that are causing us some deal of stress when we get into arguments. Yeah. So as a woman yourself, Carla, are you more masculine minded, more logical, or are you more intuitive? Do you feel first and then think, or do you think first and then feel? It's just a slight difference in the type of women we are, but we're all women. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I know I'm more intuitive than I am logical. Go on.
I see that in you. I can see that. I mean, I can't see the whole of your body, but I get the sense of the times I've been with you that you really tune into your intuition and your feelings. But because you're a very bright, wise, and mature woman, you have a good intelligence about how to manage different types of people. I'm the same. I'm more logical, but I have the same intelligence as a woman, but my preferred style is to be thinking first and then feeling. So I've always had this preference towards logic. And in fact, I was born a mathematician and a geometrist, and a dressmaker was really much about putting shapes together, which is why I created a map, because I'm a mapping type of person. So we all have our unique born qualities. So what joins us together as women is that women are all, we have a womb, we have monthly cycles, we have hormones, we have different, there is some evidence that we have different types of brains that have more interlateral connections. This is just general data. But what's happening is that we're all there to come together. So one of the things I look at is that men are more like, if you like, a straight line or a square, and women are more like a curve or a circle. And we can think about conversation like that. Some conversation is very straight line, and some conversation is very circular. And we need both. So we need ways of bringing these shapes and flows together. And so I love when you're doing your panel shows, you sometimes, I'm not sure whether you're listening, and then I know you're absolutely listening because you come out with some dynamite intuitive statements.
I hope it looks like I'm listening, because I am. And there's a need sometimes to kind of pull back in order to listen.
Yes. And that's really important as well, because a lot of the masculine energy in a masculine male or a masculine female like myself is very action orientated and going streaming this way. Now we're in this pause. We need some direction, but we also need to recognize the flow. We've got to listen to what's going on around us. And that's what you do very, very effectively. You bring those intuitive links in. So at core, we have the same operating pattern, but we have these wonderful different preferences. But because we're wise and enlightened and we're rising our consciousness, more and more we understand how to manage the whole range of masculine and feminine energy. So the masculine and feminine energy is in both men and women. And I believe what COVID and the pandemic pause is inviting us to do is to recognize that future business and life, economy and society needs to understand the feminine and masculine together, not submerged by each other, but valued situationally for its value. So when you're intuitively listening and then you come in with a direct question, it's almost using that feminine and the masculine.
Thank
effectively.
you. I never even thought of that. At the English show, I found my panel for tomorrow. And the reason I'm telling you this is tomorrow's going to be a little different. Usually I have 2 women and 2 men. But tomorrow I'm going to have one. I'm having the youth in a way. I'm going to have an 18-year-old lady, an 18-year-old, 20-year-old boy, and a 19-year-old boy, and a man who is early 30s. And I thought, oh, I need to get that. You know, maybe I shouldn't have the older man. And then I thought, no, this feels right. And it's a big change in what I normally do.
And what you'll find, Carla, is that you more often use that statement. So I had this, shall I do I'll feel for the answer. And I was even having a conversation with somebody last night on the phone about possibly working with her as a client. And she said, oh, I've got goosebumps on my arms. I bet you get goosebumps. It's like there's something around a situation, you go, oh yes, this feels right. And in a way, that's what I tapped into when I met Jim. I just knew there was something right about the meeting. I didn't know what it was. I wasn't trying to control it. And I think that's what we're learning now, is how to blend our feelings and our thinking as we rise into a more conscious awareness of the connectivity we can bring. But we need both, we need both. And that's where my work with the gender dynamics map, it's not about limiting people. It's about saying you can be yourself, that's okay, but recognize where other people are and look at the conversations that's in the center of the group. Now, obviously on screen, there's a degree of difficulty because we're on separate screens. When you're in a room in a circle, there's a different energy, but it's the energy flow. Yeah.
I forgot what it's like to be in a room with people.
Well, that's right. And because we are unlikely to get back into gatherings yet, and we don't know how long that will be, I think it's about really understanding how to energize the screen here, how to really feel. And it's about setting intentions. I think I would say to people, set intentions as opposed to expectations, because expectations can control you, whereas intentions have a kind of a lovely energy of the unexpected.
I'm actually very excited by what you're saying, because I've noticed it in my conversations with men and getting to know them. There's a real difference. Like, you may want to just say, this is going on. The first thing, how can I fix? They're thinking, how can I fix it? Or I can't fix this, so don't bother me with it. And I'm like, I wasn't asking you to fix it. I was just asking you to listen.
That's interesting, you see, because one of the things I've studied, and this is going to be in my next book and my work with a program that I have, which is called Working Together, Real Synergy, is that some people do want to fix it. So you tend to find that the masculine energy, especially in the masculine male, wants to fix it. Whereas the feminine male, he's listening. He's more contemplative. He will probably listen and talk with women in a different way. And then with women, there's some women who are over nurturing and want to nurture everything, and other women who are more if you like, they've got that masculine energy of like action, but it's based in a female body. So you've got lots of different energies. And one of the things I do in the magical conversation is I say there's no coercion. Now, what I mean by that is I don't want you to say, can we fix it? So that you can do that later. So what I do with my sessions is I time them. And if it was all male, I would probably have a shorter session than if it was all female. Because, you know, as we know it, there's some men who just don't want to chat that long. And that's okay too. It's not about trying, and my goal is it's not about trying to control anybody, but it's also about recognizing that we have different styles and we have different behavior styles, and the gender dynamics intelligence is about adding to emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. It's saying there will be occasions when there might be somebody in the room who doesn't want to listen the way you would like them to listen, but that's their choice. And your choice is to be you. Does that make sense? Because one of our battles is that, and it's not a battle, but the seeming battle is the masculine male boss who says, well, this is my woe, this is my road, this is my, you know, you either do it or you're not here. That's his style maybe. But in a world where we're opening up to men and women working in real synergy, we want the creative energy, we want the directive energy, we want the logic, we want the intuition. We need to recognize who's bringing that into the room. And if we know that the value of the mix will make the right cake, if you like, then we have to learn this new skill. And that's why I work with some crisis management teams where they're looking to help a CEO who has never had to worry about his people before, because it's all been just ticking over. And now he or she is going, oh, do I have to become a behavioralist to understand them all? No, you just have to understand a few basic tenets, if you like, of being human. And so like you love your intuition and your feeling, and I really honor that. I might on occasion go more to the logic and the gut, but I recognize now that we have value to add together. And
that's the whole point.
Absolutely.
I have a friend who hates to be on the phone or hates to have long conversations. And he'll say, I'll give you 10 minutes. And the 10 minutes always goes way over the 10 minutes. And for a long time, I thought, oh, I'm being selfish. And then I realized I can't make the decision when he wants to get off. It's up to him.
Absolutely. And I think I go back to the idea of dance. I don't know whether you've ever done partner dancing. So any dance, you know, whether it's the waltz or the quick step or the Argentine tango, they've got different flavors. But with the partner dancing, you have to be in tune with the music, but also with each other. Otherwise, you step on their feet and that's it. You know, the dance is not going to happen. And so you learn the steps. Like we're born and we learn how to walk and talk and the basics, but how we use that is listening to the rhythm of life, is flowing with the dance. So in this conversation, you know, where's the other one feeling? Am I watching what you're feeling? Am I, you know, interested and interesting? Am I pausing in the right places? And that feels like it's learning it, but it becomes more natural. So when you dance and partner dance, I know the basics. If I'm dancing with a man who knows how to dance, I know from the second that he holds me in the right position that I'll be able to do it if I let go and just listen to the music. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, that's what you found when you met your husband.
Absolutely. And I think listening is one of the greatest challenges for those people who want to fix it and go into action.
It's interesting. I was talking to a young couple today in the past 2 days who one of the couple has been very close to me for several years. And as I watched them converse and I watched their conversation together, I saw how perfect they were together because it was a perfect dance.
Yes.
And I thought, don't worry about this relationship. It will grow. It will get only stronger.
Yeah.
And one of the things the girl said to me was, I wanted a real connection. I didn't just want to have a boyfriend.
Absolutely. And if you think about connection, it's like if you plug the wire into the wall for electricity, you create a connection, you pull it out, there's no connection. That's what we're doing. And so in any relationship, an intimate one or familial one or a friendship one, there can be times when we've forgotten the steps and we step on somebody. But our intention to keep the friendship or the relationship going is down to us. And we can still have an argument. And I know Jay Shetty says, the power of a really good relationship is the way you can deal with an argument. And I agree with him. It's like negative and positive impulses can be good. Obviously, they can explode. But actually having that frisson of difference in relationships is about understanding it. I often tell my clients, say an audience, as I said, okay, how many of you are difficult? And in most audiences, you'll get about 3 hands come up out of 100. And I say, how many of you know a difficult person? Every hand goes up. And I go, okay, how does that work? There's only 3 difficult people here, and yet there's 100 people who know difficult people. It's actually a difficult situation. It's not a difficult person. It's a difference misunderstood. And that's what I think happens in families, in parenting, is if only we were taught very early on to really value differences. You can see the differences on my gender map in the playground. You think about the playground, Carla. There's a tough boy who's always kicking the football, and then there's the quiet boy who's more studious and he might be stepping back and making friends with one person. There's the tough little girl who's the tomboy and she's climbing up trees, and then there's the princess who likes to be very pretty, and there's a whole range in between. But if we understood these differences, I believe they're important because they are in a way intimate. I mean, families can be intimate or destructive. Obviously, relationships, and I'm not talking about sexual intimacy, but I wrote an article recently about what I call soulmate friendship, is that if we could have this idea that, in a higher consciousness world, we have compassion for everybody. So we understand somebody is different or they're in a different situation, and we deal with that as opposed to get angry about it. We look at how do we create the right energy in the flow to solve whatever issues. And that's why I say my passion now is to get a magical conversation about the hard subjects, where the ones where people normally start arguing. And one of the differences is that the conversation is in the center of the subject matter is in the center of the conversation, not in the person. Do you see what that means? Yeah. I think if we let go of the ownership, what we do is we look at the subject matter, even if it's a tricky one, like, equality or racism or whatever it is, we look at it as we're bringing our experience in and we're sharing our experience, which is our view, but it's not a judgment. So we're not slamming the table and saying my way or the highway. We're actually saying, well, in my experience of this, da, 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 da. And then we're listening to everybody and we're gathering perspectives. It's not going to be necessarily easy, but I think that's where we grow higher consciousness levels.
Yeah. Well, do you feel that meditation is also a very useful tool?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything from breathing, meditation, music, knowing ourselves as a sentient being means that I think we need to understand our breath, our body, and taking time out. it's really interesting you mentioned meditation, because I remember I still do have a wonderful shaman friend, but she's in Peru at the moment. And she said, oh, meditate. And I said, oh, I find it really difficult to meditate. She said, well, you don't need to meditate for long. You can do it for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. So it depends on you. And also you don't need to think about things, just calm your mind, breathe. And that's why I do Qigong, because Qigong is about just being, breathing, stopping breathing, moving very slowly. But I can't say that I do it every day, but I know the experience. So if I need it, I will go and call on it. And I think it's really important that we don't get hounded by other people to say, oh, you must go and do this, because we need to make choices ourselves to know our own value.
I agree with that. When you make a choice because someone says you should do it, it has very little meaning. Whereas
Right.
you make a choice because you feel that it needs to be done, then,
Yes.
or it needs to be done, then it changes to a more positive.
Well, that's right. And I think a lot of people in today's world who are not engaged and are fearful and worried and concerned, I understand why there is a lot of stress, and there's a high suicide rate in young boys, and a lot of people have lost meaning, but the answer is within them. It's about knowing what we were born with, what makes us laugh, what do we smile at, what can we do easily, because there's always something we can do easily, even if it's reading or playing music or just laughing. There's personal things that we never learned at school. We just have them. And the more we understand that, the more we can then get into communities and connecting with other people. But most of the people who are fearful about connecting with another person is because they're not quite sure who they are. And therefore they try and over control somebody else as a way of dealing with that. But actually we just need to relax and be ourselves. And I didn't realize that probably till I was well into my 50s, and I mean, you can't learn everything at school, for sure.
It's just like the person who introduces himself at the show and takes 10 minutes and 2 minutes for the topic. That person is insecure.
Yes.
Whereas the person who says blah, 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 done, and goes straight to the topic,
yes,
is the person who is secure in who he or she is.
Well, that's right. And I think we have a huge opportunity to somehow get these messages out. And I mean, I say somehow because social media is so powerful, but there are so many messages. Sometimes I think it's confusing for somebody who hasn't actually started on that path, and they're looking for somebody else to sort them out. The idea for me about magical conversations, and I teach people across the world to become ambassadors of magical conversation in their own environment. I've got some students in the Philippines and Malaysia, and hopefully here soon, is that we can spread this way of having conversations in the family unit, where sometimes there are arguments. It's understanding that the topic is in the middle of the conversation. It's not held with somebody. So somebody might bring the conversation to the table, but once it's on the table, then the guideline or the rule is that everybody shares from their experience, their knowledge, experience, and imagination. That's what we talk about. Bring your knowledge, use your experience, and then use your imagination to imagine what it is you desire to become real.
Thank you so very much, Pauline. This is over 50 minutes now, so.
Yes, thank you as well for you listening. I really appreciate that. And I love the fact that we are different types of women, because that makes the joy of understanding each other even better for me.
But everyone's different.
Oh, absolutely.
You just need to learn to accept the differences. And with that, I want to thank you for speaking with me tonight, Pauline. I want to thank those who watched.
Thank you.
And thank the Institute of Peace for sponsoring this conversation. And we are going to end our conversation. Thank you so very much. We'll wave goodbye. And I know everyone thinks it's silly, but I feel better when I wave goodbye.
Oh, absolutely. It's like my Queen wave in England, the royal wave.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Carla.
Bye.